Thanks, Jason. I'm very excited to be here and tell you guys all about our experience that we had in Tokyo. I'm going to start out by sharing a few documents. So, yeah, the Tokyo 2020 games was a very interesting set of games. With as everybody has experienced with pandemic life, uh, the games were delayed a year, and in that year there were many changes, many augmentations, many challenges we had to deal with. One of those being in the transmission world and delivering signals to everybody that needed them. So our NBC Olympics approach to the Tokyo 2020 Games, I will argue that it was the most ambitious, technically advanced sporting event to date. Just given the sheer size, length, and all of the different partners that were involved, it was a challenge. Many of the challenges that did face us were the postponement. With the postponement and the in the pandemic, social distancing came into play, quarantines for travel, both from the U.S. to Tokyo, people coming into the U.S. And also, as many of you know, a lot of the staff is not just from the U.S., they're from around the world. So dealing with the quarantines, the regulations for each country and how they were dealing with it were very difficult. And our operations department and logistics crew travel, they were great in adjusting to that. Along with all that stuff came production changes. We introduced 1080p HDR into our Olympic production, as well as 1080i SDR. So many challenges there, just coordinating, making sure everybody had the right things in the right places. The thing that made it successful for both NBC, OBS, and the Tokyo Organizing Committee was the teamwork of everyone, the coordination, the cooperation of many groups to make sure that all the safety precautions were being taken into consideration with all of our new plans, as well as adjustments to technology, connectivity, really was amazing. The creativity of both production people, but also many on the technical side, with remote operation. There was a lot of creativity from engineering to make sure that all of the new workflows and technology worked. It was great to see. Understanding from production that what they had before wasn't what they were necessarily going to get, and also from vendors, the organizing committee, OBS, and the NBC worldwide teams. It took coordination and cooperation from all of those different people to make all of it work, whether it was adjusting contracts, adjusting timelines, building things, coordination with vendors to get parts. It was a lot of work, long days, but well worth it. Later on in the presentation, I'll go through the individual connections that we had in Tokyo, but I did want to introduce kind of what we did as NBC Sports. Many know us as NBC Sports in Stamford, but for these games, there were actually 7 locations across the US to make all of this work. Stamford, where a lot of our production happened, but then you had New York and Inglewood Cliffs and Dry Creek for all of our network distribution for both I and P, as well as some Peacock at Inglewood Cliffs. We also had CNBC, who was a partner of ours as one of our production arms. We had other production studios at 30 Rock, and down at Telemundo, they produced the Olympic Channel as well as the Telemundo Network. Las Vegas, where our partner Ice Cream Planet is for a lot of our streaming operations. And then, I mentioned it earlier, but also Stamford. It's our production hub, where our highlights factory is, where our off-tube factory is. But we also have Peacock out of there, and NBC Sports Digital. So that operation was probably the biggest. The other part of this production was, even though it was US-based teams and US-based distribution, one of our other partners, Sky, as a part of Comcast, they produced indoor volleyball from Sky. So that signal, which I'll talk about in a bit, but went from Tokyo all the way to the UK and back to Stamford. So they were great partners in all of this as well. All of our signals got distributed to 41 owned and operated NBC and Telemundo local stations, as well as over 250 NBC and Telemundo affiliates. So our distribution was huge, and much of that from the NBC O&O side was in 1080i and 1080p. The Tokyo location. So connectivity in Tokyo. We had two 100 gig connections between the IBC and two local pops in Tokyo. This was our main connection out of the IBC to the world. But within Tokyo, we had 18 connected venues. We had connections ranging from 10 gigs to 1 gigs. We had dark fiber in some locations and straight up internet for broadcast using LiveU. Where venues required multiple connections, we worked with OBS to make sure that they were diverse connections. Those connections made it so that if we had issues with any of our hitless operation, that it wasn't taken down if we had a fiber cut. International connectivity, our total connectivity from Tokyo to the US was 8 10 gigs. 6 of those were dedicated to just video transport, and 2 of them were dedicated to IT for IP related video, file transfer for video for EVS files and Avid type operations, and then all of our back office operations. For those 8 10 gigs, there were 5 diverse routes underneath the ocean to protect us against fiber cuts under the Pacific Ocean. And then once it got into the US, we had 5 individual landing stations, and then we had a protected routable network across the US that was provided to us by AT&T. The design behind this network gave us the ability to have predictable routes across the US, that if there was planned maintenance, we could proactively route around planned maintenance, or if there was fiber affecting events such as fiber cuts or weather, the network would automatically reroute itself in a very deterministic way, and was quite successful. We never had an outage of longer than about probably a second to reroute feeds. So that was very beneficial, as in past games we have had issues throughout the US with just road construction and other problems. As I go through the next couple slides, I want to call out our partners, and I'll explain a little bit more, but AT&T provided all of our connectivity and MediaLink's connectivity. Comcast provides all of our connection within the US. We have a redundant network among all of the NBC locations. So they are a great partner and owner to provide all of that to us. OBS, MediaLinks, Hivision, LiveU, TechX, MediaLinks, all QuickLink, all these partners helped us get to be where we were. So that is kind of the general overview. To dig into more details, some people have probably seen some of this in the past, but many years ago, before I was here, when NBC first started, I think it was Sydney, they came up with names for all of the lines from Sydney to the US, and somebody put it on a map and they called it a subway map because it started to look like a New York subway map. Well, that map has grown quite a bit. In Sydney, There were three lines from Sydney to the US and one back. As you can see here, this is our current subway map, and to give you a perspective, this is only media links connectivity. This is not any IP encoded video on high vision or media kind or any other connections. This is just purely media links. The way this flows is you have Tokyo and Japan on the left-hand side, and then our US and UK locations on the right. So with our partners of AT&T and MediaLinks, this whole network is designed in a way so that every piece of video in here is hitless. So the intention is that if we lose one connection, we have another connection to protect us. With the changes for Tokyo, from the pandemic, we moved a fair amount of venues home to Stamford to be produced. So in our building in Stamford, we had 4 TV trucks out on the dock that helped us produce this. And just a little note, right before the Olympics happened, the decision was made to produce the Open Championship in a remote style. So we were actually able to bring in one of our trucks earlier to use for the Open that was scheduled for the Olympics, which gave us actually a good practice run to see if we had any issues. But in these smaller squares on the left, these are each one of our venues where we had a presence of MediaLink. So opening ceremonies, closing ceremonies, and then that's also track and field, indoor volleyball, basketball, beach volleyball. We had an NBC studio at the Hilton in Tokyo. We had a studio and a TV tower provided by OBS, and then we also had a golf. We produced golf from home as well. Other locations that had MediaLinks connectivity were swimming and diving, gymnastics, water polo, skateboarding, BMX, tennis, and then 3-on-3 and sport climbing. So each one of these venues had connections that, for the most part, went from the venue back to Stamford. Everything stopped over in the IBC from a stream perspective, but a majority of it just flowed on through, right through to Stamford. Golf, beach volleyball, and basketball were produced out of trucks that were on the truck dock in Stamford. Indoor volleyball traveled all the way, like I mentioned earlier, from Tokyo all the way over to Skye in the UK. It utilized connections provided by AT&T to Stamford, and then we utilized connections provided by Comcast in a network that we already had in place to get it the rest of the way over to the UK and then back. So this was a sea change for us, transporting all of these venues home, but it was quite successful and worked quite well. Along with the NBC primetime studio going back to the IBC, these cameras also landed in Stamford and 30 Rock, because that studio was shared between primetime, Today Show, and some of the other shows. There was also a television studio at the ceremonies location for Telemundo. So you kind of sense a theme here of really at any venue where there was presence, we were trying to get the video back to our various partners. At the IBC, there were many decodes and encodes that were traveling back and forth. We utilized a lot of different technology from MediaLinks to be able to protect us against failures. There's a lot of effort put into making sure that we had diversity, both of connections as well as equipment, redundancy, with power, fiber. So much thought was put into making sure that there was uh, no common place that a failure could happen. If there was a fiber cut, a power outage, we spent a lot of time making sure that we were able to withstand those errors. Within the US, we had locations, both Stamford, Inglewood Cliffs, NBC Dry Creek, which is in Colorado, Telemundo, and Sky in the UK. So all of these locations are connected by a diverse network throughout the US. AT&T has spent a lot of time studying and designing a system where no one outage will take the entire network down. So a lot of our connections are delivered to both Stamford and New York, so that we can withstand an outage. And then if for some reason there was a whole outage with this whole network, we do have satellite backup as well as ENG in the case of a massive failure. So we try to think of everything that we can to protect us. One other slide I have here is, this is just kind of a visual representation of all of the different venues and the different connections that we have, whether it be 10 gigs, 1 gigs, internet, just connections through OBS for audio, video. So we try to document as much as we can so that when people show up to come to work in that country, they have all the documentation they have. One of the other things that was quite successful for us during this games was LiveU. We made a large investment into LiveU at these games to help us out. We had a total of 16 packs, which were distributed both in venues and then to different news groups within NBC. So Telemundo, NBC News, as well as our sports desk to get footage. We worked a lot with LiveU to ensure that it was going to be reliable, but also for different workflows with shoot and file transfer of high-end files to be able to help us achieve the things that we needed. It was probably partly the network within Japan, but the amount of throughput that we got, the way that the backpack performed was great. Was better than any expectations we had. So that was really nice. One other thing that OBS also provided to us, which was new this year, was what they call the mix zone IP. And this was a huge help to us because it didn't require additional connections, but it was a dedicated internet to us in the interview area, in the mix zone, that we could plug into our LiveU packs, which gave us a ton of reliability, as well as the assistance of the bonded cellular network. So this was great because we also utilized this with many of our partners around, and our NBC partners. So our group in Tokyo in the Olympics, as well as Stamford, but also News and Telemundo. But then this also helped us utilize our other partners, the other RHBs within the Olympics. So, we worked with different news and production organizations around the world to help us get footage from different families and other things of watch parties around the world to help with our broadcast. So, that's kind of the overview of what we did. There's, not displayed in these drawings was IP video offerings. One thing that really was quite a challenge for us in these games was the social distancing and the rules that were in place to protect everyone at the venues. When we got there, there was not allowed. We were not, or the regulations said that we could only have 1 or 2 people in the mix zone. So we had to separate people. There were a lot of tools that we had put in place during the pandemic to help some of our remote operations in getting people back to work. But 2 of those things that we weren't expecting to use heavily, which we ended up using quite heavily for monitoring purposes, were High Vision and their High Vision Media platform. That allowed us to allow producers, camera talent to view remotely feeds because they were not allowed to be able to be together and then communicate back and forth. That was a huge tool for us. Another one was a company out of the UK called TechX. They have a platform that allows you on an iOS device to be able to view IP streams from within our building. These 2 tools were priceless for us to be able to have our talent, producers, directors, people that were separated from the production because of the restrictions that we had, allowed them to do their jobs that they needed to. Both of those technologies utilized SRT. So really, they did not have to be on a network. As long as they had internet, as long as they had cellular, they were able to see those. They were able to see any video they really needed to. So that was a huge help to us. And then there were just some other things that were very good for us from a production standpoint and transmission standpoint. We worked very hard and spent a lot of time on both closed captioning of all of our streams. We worked with a couple different vendors, EEG being one of them, to be able to add closed captioning to our voice streams. We also did a lot of AD description, some audio description, to be able to help many of the different communities get access to the content. So that was a lot of fun, figuring out those types of things. So there were many challenges, but I would say there were many victories out of those challenges. It was a lot of time, it was a lot of effort, but it was just very enjoyable in the end. So I want to thank you all for listening, and if there are any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.